Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm going to talk on endotherapy for colorectal lesions. I'm Dr. Madhura Prasad from Coimbatore. So I'm just dividing it into two, polypoid lesions and colorectal bleeding. Let's look at polyps. The Kudos classification is what we generally, and it's very easy to use. So we're going to first assess the polyp. Does it have a regular round pit pattern? Then it's probably just a normal and asteroid or papillary pits. This way, it's probably hyperplastic. These two, you can safely do whatever you want. Here, this is small tubular or roundish pits. It could be an adenoma, but more likely when we see these kind of elongated pits, right, or branch-like or gyrate pits, it's more likely to be an adenoma. And when there is a loss of the mucosal pattern or a loss of structure, then it's more likely to be adenocarcinoma. Look at this bizarre appearance. NICE classification also gives it very nicely. Here you see that NICE classification divides it into 1, 2, and 3 types and takes into account the color, vessel, and the surface pattern. Why do we need to know all this? Because that is going to help us decide how deep we are going to cut. If the polyp has a peduncle, it's very easy. That definitely there's not going to be any invasion if the peduncle looks very normal and not involved, the NBA pattern. But if it's a sessile polyp, then we'll have to go in and assess what we're going to do, pre-plan it, even use an EUS endo ultrasound help to find out which layer is involved. Now let's see the color, vessel, and surface pattern. As we know, the NBI can predict which layer is involved. It's just a mucosa or a submucosa or muscularis propria involvement. That there are very well documented ways of differentiating. Now, if you see here, is it a light color like this, or is the color? Look at the color of the background is going darker, and the vessel pattern is very regular to irregular. If it is elongated like this, it's more likely to be an adenomatous pattern. And here, this is bizarre. This anybody can differentiate, right? So then the background surface pattern, we're going to differentiate and then proceed. Now, is there a superficial colorectal neoplasia? Is it non-pedunculated or pedunculated? If it's pedunculated, look at the stalk size. Is the head size small and the stalk thickness less than 5 millimeter? You can do a Hartschner polypectomy. This is a little older article. You can also do a Kolsner according to the, based on the stalk thickness. We always prefer a Hartschner polypectomy, but Kolsner is coming into vogue right now, so I want to discuss that later. Let's see the head size more or the stalk thickness more than prophylactic ligation of the stalk using a detachable loop or clips and then safely proceeding. Is there a non-pedunculated sessile polyp? Now, this is where we need to do the imaging, find out if it's diminutive, small, or large. Large polyps are what we're going to decide what we're going to do, right? So if that's a large polyp, and endoscopic imaging, we need to know if there is a submucosal invasion by endo ultrasound. Easily we can see if the muscularis propria submucosa is invaded. What's the other way of differentiating of involvement directly on the spot? The lifting sign. Very easily done. You just inject saline. If there is a good lift, most likely you're not going to be seeing any invasion. We do not usually resect lesions which have a non-lifting sign. We don't go for it, or else we alert the surgical team, look for the depth of invasion, alert the patient to the possibility of breaching the muscularis propria, and also the most importantly, if we're going to go with such a lesion, we might leave some tissue behind which is going to be, there could be a recurrence or a unknown malignancy in the depths. So it's better to have the lifting sign before we proceed. Here, there's a non-invasive lesion which could be intermediate size, 10 to 19 millimeters. You can decide for EMR for non-polypoid or suspected serrated lesions, or a large size, go for endoscopic mucosal resection, and we have to resect as much as everything. All the visible lesions should be resected. Suspected submucosal invasion, we can go for EMR or ESD, and suspected deeper invasion, please go for surgery and don't attempt. Yes, as I said, lifting sign is very important. Let's look at this video. I just want to show you how this is an older video. It's a wonderful teaching video, but I definitely want to show this. So I'm going to share another screen. it's a good teaching video. I want to show all the different techniques in one single video. So I want to share this one. I'm going to reshare my screen a bit. See, that is the standard polypectomy, which is going on, where the peduncle is injected and the snare is used. Always rotating the scope to bring the polyp into focus. So you know now why I wanted to show this video. My guru and my father, Dr. V.G. Mohan Prasad, is here demonstrating. And all his students love this, so I just wanted to show it. Injection into the base, lifting up the white out over there definitely shows us that we can go ahead and garlanding the polyps. Bringing the polyp into the 6 o'clock position is definitely going to be useful. Hot biopsy forceps, we use it on tiny polyps, which, and the base has to be cooked until, to destroy any tissue there. And always when you do the polypectomy, it is good to bring the polyp after garlanding it, bring it to the center of the field, away from the mucosa to avoid any injury to either end of the mucosa. Here we are having a thicker pedicle, so we're going with an endo loop and going around it and tightening it at the base. You can see how very well the demonstration of how to deploy an endo loop there. Yes. So after that, the Americans have a way of resecting below the endo loop, but we always go above the endo loop and leave the loop in place to prevent any bleeding. Well, they like to remove entirety of the lesion, so they usually go below the loop, but we go above the loop. So you can see us removing to the Rothnet, and this is one of the complications of polypectomy, bleeding, where we're going to clip here. So a hemoclip is being deployed here to clip the base. So always better to visualize it for a while and then come out. Yes, and always better to anticipate, inject, raise, and even beyond that, you can see how thick the pedicle is. I'm going to stop that and go back to my presentation. So, cold and hot snare polypectomy. What they're worried about is, one is the damage to the mucosa. So delayed bleeding occurs more after hot snare polypectomy. Now, 15 patients underwent histological evaluation. So what they did is they saw after polypectomy, how did the histology look? And cold, all the depth was only up to the shallow submucosa. Whereas in hot polypectomy, there was some depth damage, which is what they demonstrated. So what we generally do is we pull after garlanding the polyp, we pull it away from the mucosa and then snare it off. So even though we have not seen much of delayed bleeding, this is what is advocated. Try to do cold snare as much as possible, that's what they say. Now coming to the next patient, is a 63-year-old lady with a distal rectal growth, and the growth came as, histopathology came as tubulovillous adenoma. The CECT showed no invasion, no perirectal staining, because it looked very malignant. They went for a CT scan, everything was normal, and they referred for an endoscopic submucosal dissection. Here there is, you can see it's a large one involving more than half the circumference, and we had to do it in 2 sittings, the ESD, and you can see Dr. VGM resecting it here. He's going to the base, and what's important in the colorectal lesions ESD is the curves and the twists of the colon. So going with the plane is very it has to be very carefully done because of the turns of the colon. And this lesion was at such a junction. And you can see the white knife was the IT knife, the IT nano knife, and then he's going in he uses basically the IT nano knife more for dissection. And you can see the base where we are spraying collagen. Collagen helps in healing, and this is his own invention. And he uses it a lot. Now you can see here in 3 months, there's wonderful healing. And one area alone, there was some dark brown color of NBI. So we went in and biopsied it, and that came as just kudos. I mean, it came as an adenomatous polyp. After that, we still had the patient under surveillance, the same patient at 1 year. And again, there was a small polyp, but it did not, then entirely normal at 2 years. So this patient is doing very well now after resection. Here is a patient where we did not want to resect actually. The patient had a and it was not involving the muscularis propria. And the patient was advised surgery, but he was 90 years old and he had extreme difficulty every time during when passing motion. He was actually having a lot of discomfort because of the growth being right next to the anal verge. So he wanted it to be resected. This was done 2.5 years ago. I did this resection. It was all planned by by surgeon in their family. So look at this. We are dissecting from the base. I think the video is not playing. Yeah. From the base, you can see the muscularis propria here, and very carefully we resected. Obviously, there were a few spots of involvement, and we did APC at that point. This also took almost 4 hours plus 4 hours. We did it in 2 sittings. And here, this is the final resected area where this is the APC where we've done APC and then we sprayed collagen. And fingers crossed, the patient is still doing well after 2 years with no recurrence. Now, this is the next case. Is a 68-year-old gentleman with loss of appetite and weight loss. It's an unusual patient. He came with a PR bleed also. Actually, imaging showed metastatic lesions in the liver, and the largest was measuring 8 by 5 centimeters, and we went in for the biopsy of the liver. The liver lesions were biopsied. The liver biopsy was suggestive. It was very confusing. Some of them we went with 2 pathologists. One said it is a hepatocellular carcinoma, and the other one was of the opinion that it could be a metastasis, cholangio, or hepatocellular carcinoma. So, not being clear about what it was, we went in to see the rectal lesion, which was identified on CT abdomen. There was a distal rectal polyp. So, the rectal polyp looked like probably a submucosal lesion. We went in, we did an EUS. It seemed to be arising from layer 2 or 3, and no infiltration of muscularis propria was there. And I did this EST here. Like we marked the lesion around, and then after marking, we connect the points. Now we're using a TTJ knife. So here again, the lesion was lifting very well from the base, you can see. We use indigo carmine, and also we use hydroxymethyl cellulose to raise the lesion. Now there are other different agents which have come to raise lesions and keep them lifted, which is very important for ESDs. So here, this indigo carmine helps to differentiate the muscularis propria and the rest. The muscularis propria will be visible as a nice white layer. It's important for the diet to not be too concentrated, because then you'll not be able to differentiate the muscularis propria from the submucosa. We can also tunnel into the lesion and then go and resect, or we can continue to resect on all sides, and then finally the base is resected. When resecting the base, it's better to visualize, because there will definitely be one stalk which will bleed a lot. Now you can see the base where the muscularis propria is there. And I think this procedure took around 2 hours to do. And we had any large vessels at the base, we coagulate it and then spray collagen. And so that is how this patient, it turned out to be neuroendocrine tumor. And then the immunohistochemistry was done for the metastatic liver lesion also. It also turned out to be the same neuroendocrine. So it is metastatic neuroendocrine. Generally in neuroendocrine tumors, it has been seen that if you remove the primary, the metastatic lesions also start to disappear. Even this patient is doing very well now. And we did a gallium DOTA knock, which showed only a liver activity. And the patient is undergoing PRRT, particulate therapy. Now, coming to other things, malignancies and other complications in colon, colonic SEMS insertion. Colorectal SEMS stenting technique is simple. You're going to insert most commonly we use an uncovered SEMS, and it's important to have a fluoroscopic guide, and there are through the scope stents, so we can have direct visualization and insert them. And that radiologically also they say they insert them, but we here do it properly under visual and fluoroscopic guidance. So here we pass the stent and guide wire contrast injection to make sure that it's in the right place and not a false subarachnoid false tract, and a partial stent deployment, pull back, and then you deploy the entire stent inside. Here are the SEMS available. This is an uncovered wall flex, which is most of them have diameter of 2 centimeters, which is important because the colonic, because the left side, the stools by then when it comes, it is firmer stools. So you need a larger diameter. Fully covered Nitti stent. So they're all stainless steel or nitinol, and this is the uncovered wall flex stent. So here it is important. The main thing is again the colonic bends and curves. Very important to make sure you're in the lumen. So injecting contrast, making sure the guide wire actually goes into the loop. And we are going in. Even sometimes we put in a pediatric scope to go in and see, but most of the time it's very difficult to do that. So we put the guide wire, contrast, check, and then deploy. You can see the stent being deployed here gradually, and that is the end. Definitive surgery is there, but it's not. All the studies are showing a higher rate, but for an aged person and to avoid it, so multi-step surgery, this is a wonderful help. And after the duration of the surgery, you can plan 5 to 10 days after the stent insertion, because you need to allow the dilated loop to recuperate. And palliative option for incurable left-sided obstructive colorectal cancers, yes, you can do it as a palliative option as well. And if you use a covered SEMS, it's going to migrate. So it's better to use an uncovered SEMS. And right-sided colorectal cancers do not require any stenting because the stool is actually of a liquid consistency in the right side. So colonic strictures, balloon dilatation. So this is a patient who's a 54-year-old with a known case of colorectal cancer who underwent surgery and chemoradiotherapy, rectosigmoid growth. And she developed stricture at the anastomotic site. We didn't know if it's due to radiation or was it an anastomotic stricture. So she had a colostomy still in place. So we went in for a dilation before to stoma reversal. So here, this is actually the second sitting. The first sitting, we couldn't even identify this. This area is not the root. We went in with a baby scope and saw, but the pediatric scope, no. The lower one, is actually the opening. And after 2 dilatations, we could visualize it clearly. Went in with a pediatric scope, and we could go into the colostomy as well. I'm going to stop here. The differentials for colonic stricture: benign, diverticulitis related, it could be Crohn's disease, can be radiation induced, infective, ischemic, could be a malignant stricture, which we have to really look out for. And pseudostricture can be a volvulus or an intersusception which presents like a stricture. And you look at it, it looks like a stricture, but it could just be any of these also. Colorectal bleeding. Let's come to the next thing. So rectal variceal band ligation. So here, when do we suspect colorectal bleeding? In a UGI bleeding, if the patient entire esophageal varices and fundal varices appears to be in a portal hypertensive bleed, appears to be normal and doesn't seem to be bleeding from there, and the patient has fresh blood per rectum, then we have to suspect. Many of them, sometimes they don't look evident on endoscopy, but they could still bleed. So EUS assessment is also coming up for evident and non-evident rectal varices. And let's see how they are actually formed, just for an academic purpose. Here, the superior rectal vein is coming down, joining the inferior and middle rectal veins. So this is coming from the portal circulation, this is from the caval circulation, and here the varices are formed. Now, what's important here is it's the reverse of an esophagus. So up, down, and down, up is reversed here. So here, the first band is applied above and the second band below. And if you see the zones in the rectal venous circulation, there's an inflow zone, a downflow zone, outflow zone, and see all these zones. So that, let's say the inflow zone starts, the outflow zone in the anal canal starts 1 to 4 centimeters, and then 4 to 6, 2 to 2 centimeters, these zones are placed, just equivalent to the gastric zone, the palisade zone, perforating zone, and the truncal zone of the esophageal varices, just to show. Now, coming to rectal variceal bleeding. So here you can see this video, I think it's not playing. I'm going to skip it, otherwise I have to log out and log in. So here, this is rectal varices. What are the options? The treatment options can be banding, sclerotherapy, cyanoacrylate glue injection. It is not very clear, and the only problem is there can be recurrence. And if there is a incessant bleed, you can go for TIPS or BO, TVO, and surgery. Surgery is, of course, the last option. Mostly, we'd like to go for a TIPS or a BOTO. And surveillance, it's better to do it once in 3 to 6 months. Here are other lesions, the small bleeding lesions. You can do a gold probe, I think. So that's another one. Radiation proctocolitis also a cause for bleed. It's becoming less and less because of advancement in the radiation therapy of cervical cancer. So here we have to assess the patient for proctitis. Is it acute or is it chronic? And we're going to look at that colonoscopically. We're going to check and the grade. So mostly what we see, the bleeding will be in the grade 3 or 2A is what we generally see, and we manage them with endotherapy and anti-inflammatory agents, antioxidants, sucralfate enemas, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy, short chain fatty acids. These are all other therapies. And basically endotherapy, we're going to do APC, formalin gauze therapy, or laser coagulation, but continue to reassess based on symptoms. If there are severe painful symptoms, the patient will need to go for a surgical intervention. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So the take-home message for colorectal lesions is assess, classify, and then take a call. And important to have all accessories on hand. It might be a simple polypectomy, but you have to anticipate a bleed, a perforation, and you should have all the devices required to help you out. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.
My sincere thanks to SGI and in particular Dr. Sahu and Dr. Avinash for giving me a chance to speak on US anatomy of the anorectum. This is a very underappreciated area where US has great applicability. Now to begin with, I'll show you the instruments which you can use for anorectal US study. This is a blind rigid rectal probe, and this is a mechanical transducer by Olympus. You also have an electronic transducer from BK Medical. And also what I have not shown is end firing probes for prostate examinations. This is again underutilized instrument. This is a mini probe UMDP2025R with dual plane reconstruction abilities. Now this is what as endoscopists we most commonly use. This is a flexible radial US scope, and all probes from all companies have similar imaging characteristics. And this is a linear probe. This is the to start the rectal evaluation with a linear probe is difficult because the anatomy is still not very well defined. We usually start with a rigid or flexible radial US probe and follow it up with a linear probe if we want to sample a tissue. Now, the comparative studies between the rigid and flexible radial probes are limited and have shown contradictory results for rectal cancer stagings. However, if you look at the performance and imaging capabilities of both of these probes, both of these can be used to examine the iliac lymph nodes and up to 20 to 25 centimeters from the anal verge. So the depth of insertion is possibly more with flexible US probes. And I think as time goes by, we'll be using the flexible instruments more and more often. So first is how do you prepare for the anorectal US examination? If we have to do a limited evaluation, particularly of the anal strictures anal sphincters, then a preparation with enema alone within 1 to 2 hours of the procedure is adequate. Or preferably, we can prepare the bowel with polyethylene glycol like we do for standard colonoscopy, a split dose regime, 2 liters the night before and 2 liters in the morning within 4 hours of the onset of the preparation. We do a perianal inspection, a digital rectal examination. Patient is usually positioned in the left lateral position, and it is wise to place some pillows underneath the patient and to angle his knee like this so that the position of the torso remains stable throughout the US examination. Patients will often not need sedation for this short procedure. We usually begin with sigmoidoscopy to evaluate the mucosa any stenotic lesions, and to clean the rectum of stool and any mucus. And as I have mentioned before, we would usually begin with a radial US scope. Now, this is how we start the study. We start by instilling around 100 cc of water to flatten the upper part of the rectum. We can add more water, but if you overfill the rectum with water, it will often mobilize the stool from the proximal rectum and may be counterproductive. We advance the flexible EUS instruments to a depth of around 30 centimeters from the anal verge. And the examination is begun by looking at the normal vascular landmarks. So at 30 centimeters, you are into the sigmoid colon, and you see the bowel loops around, and there are no identifiable structures. So the imaging is done by slow, controlled withdrawal, and the first recognizable landmarks are vascular, and I will just show you those. The probe is centered in the lumen by the use of the big wheel and the small wheel. Now, how do you display the images? Now, this is how a CT scan is done conventionally, and the CT scan shows you the pelvic anatomy as if you are looking from below upwards. So the left is to the right of the screen. Look at the CT scan image of a pelvis, and the marker shows that this is the left side of the screen, this is the right side of the screen, and the spine is here and anterior part is this. Now, if I show you the radial US imaging, normally in the upper GI tract, you image the patient in the normal orientation. With the normal orientation corresponds to the CT scan imaging, which I have just shown you. And note that the aortic arch in this transthoracic study is depicted to the left side, similar to the CT orientation. And this is a marker which shows you that it is a normal and not a reverse orientation. This is the inverse or the reverse orientation, which is seldom used in the upper GI tract. The image is now flipped, and we don't normally image the patient in the inverse orientation in the upper GI tract. However, when we go into the anorectal imaging, the probe is now coming from below upwards instead of from above down. And if we image in the normal mode, this is the reverse of the CT scan imaging. So now the right is on the right side of the image and the left is on the left side of the image if we image in the normal mode. If we image in the inverse or the reverse orientation, the image flips, and now the left is on the right side of the image, and the inverse mode in anorectal EUS perfectly corresponds to the CT scan imaging. However, most of us do not change the EUS orientation, so we continue to image in the normal mode. You can do it in either way, but then just remember that the depiction of lesions and the identification of the lateral walls and the lesions would depend how you have oriented your image when you are doing the anorectal imaging. It is the reverse of the ODAD imaging, and this must be understood. How about the linear US display orientation? This is slightly more difficult to understand. I give you the analogy of a water bottle, of a glass bottle filled with methylene blue. Now, if the probe direction is posteriorly to start with, which means that you are imaging the coccyx or the sacrum to start with, if you rotate to the right, the probe rotates to the right. Now, if the starting probe direction is anteriorly, which means that you have the pelvic organs under focus, which means the probe is directed anteriorly. If you have to go to the right side of the patient, you have to do a left rotation of the, or left or anti-clockwise rotation of the US probe. I hope this concept is understood, because with linear US probe, you just go 360 degrees, and with how to image the left side, the right side, the anterior side, and the posterior side will depend upon understanding this orientation. So have a good look at this. Let's move on now. Now, please remember that the distances from the anal verge. The anal canal is 4 centimeter long. This is the anorectal junction, which is defined by the puborectalis sling. It is just below the tip of the coccyx and corresponds to the apex of the prostate. Then you have the rectum, which is roughly around 12 centimeter long, which takes the rectosigmoid junction at around 15 to 16 centimeters from the anal verge. And this corresponds to sacral third vertebra, S3 vertebra. Now, when you have introduced your EOS probe to say around 25 or 30 centimeters, you are in the sigmoid colon. And here, if you remember your anatomy, and this is very nice to see. So how do you distinguish the sigmoid from the rectum? In the sigmoid, you can see the tinea coli. The tinea coli are the condensed or the bunched up longitudinal muscle on the outer side, outer longitudinal muscle, while the inner circular muscle is concentric. So in the sigmoid, you can see the tinea coli when you collapse the lumen. And as you withdraw to the rectum, the two layers, the inner circular and outer longitudinal, become concentric as you descend down into the rectum. The schematic EOS representation of the rectal wall is the same as in any part of the GI tract, the standard 5-layer representation. I don't have to go into this. Just remember that the muscularis propria of the rectum at current transducer frequencies is often refinable into inner circular, outer longitudinal with an inner sheath of hyperechoic fibrous tissue between the two muscle layers. Now, as I have mentioned before, once you are up into 25 and 30 centimeters and you start to withdraw, the first landmark that you see are the vascular landmarks, and these are to be identified to orient yourself. So you can see the cross sections of the aorta and the IVC. This is the aorta. To the left of the image, now I'm imaging in the normal orientation, and the cava on the right side of the screen, and this is the sacral brim or the pelvic brim. And please remember that the aorta divides at the right side, at the left side of L4 vertebra, and the cava divides on the right side of L5 vertebra. So this is the left common iliac artery, the right common iliac artery, the left common iliac vein, and the right common iliac veins. And as you pull down, you can see the aorta splitting into the two, and the cava, the tributaries of the cava, the common iliac veins converging. As you withdraw, you can see from this, the right-sided iliac vessels are usually seen as you withdraw the vessels. I don't have time to go into the detail, but in general, the artery is closer to the probe, and this stays true regardless of whether you are using a radial probe or a linear probe. So you have the artery which is running closer to the probe. This is the common iliac artery, and the common right iliac vein is away from the probe. Then you see the right common iliac artery splits like a fork into its external and the internal divisions, and you can see further divisions of the internal right iliac artery further down. But there are a lot of variations in the iliac artery divisions. How about the peritoneal reflection? This is very important oncologically because the grading of rectal cancer into T4A and T4B will depend whether the peritonealized surface of the rectum has been breached. So T4B rectal cancer is when the rectal cancer breaches into the visceral peritoneum or into the adjacent organ. So endoscopically, we know that the middle rectal fold is the mark of the anterior peritoneal reflection around 7 to 8 centimeters from the anal verge, usually marked by the right side, as you see in this image. In a male patient, the top of the seminal vesicles is the marker for the anterior peritoneal reflection, and in the females, the cervix or the posterior fornix of the vagina marks the peritoneal reflection. Now, how about the pelvic planes and pelvic spaces? Please remember that the lateral wall of the pelvis is formed by the obturator internus. Then you have the levator ani, which divides the subperitoneal pelvis into the supralevator or an infralevator compartment or the perineum. On a heavily T2 weighted MRI, we can define the mesorectal fascia, but in a sufficiently fatty patient, even on US, if you look very carefully, you can make out the mesorectal fascia. And again, this is very important when you are staging a rectal cancer, particularly T3 tumors, when you can actually on US define the threatened CRM like it is done on a MR scan. Now, as you withdraw further, you reach the pelvic organs. The probe is rotated electronically, not by torque, but electronically on the ultrasound console to place the pelvic organs anteriorly. And this is what you see in both males and females. This is a large filled bladder. You will often see the ureter entering the posterolateral surface of the bladder like this. The pubis with its hyperechoic reflection is seen anteriorly. And then you have the seminal vesicles lying posterior-inferior to the bladder. And as you withdraw, you will reach the prostate. So this is a radial EOS imaging showing the obturator internus forming the pelvic side wall. the bladder anteriorly, the seminal vesicles, the probe in the rectum. This is the area of the Denon-Villiers fascia. And this is a linear probe showing the same thing, the bladder, the seminal vesicles, the prostate, and the pubis. The prostate has a central zone and a peripheral zone. Again, you can do a detailed prostatic examination. Time does not permit me to tell you that. This is the obturator internus. This is the ischial bone with its reflection. And then as you trace the prostatic urethra down, you see the bulbar urethra going anteriorly with the corpus spongiosum on either side. And this is a schematic representation of the levator ani or the pelvic floor, taking off from the sheath of the obturator internus and the obturator internus, which is forming the side wall of the pelvis, also seen here on a EUS examination. In the females, obviously, you see the uterus, which has an oblique lie in most patients behind the bladder and between the rectum. And also, as you withdraw down, you see the cervix, sometimes with cysts, and then the vagina with the Denon-Villiers fascia or the rectovaginal fascia in between, with a linear air stripe in between. With a linear probe directed anteriorly, you can again make out the vagina. It is seen very thin behind the bladder and the pelvic floor. I shall just show you better in the next image. So here is again another patient with a linear probe evaluation of the female pelvic organs. You have the bladder, you have the female urethra, you have the uterus, which can have a very variable appearance with a lot of pathologies. You have the cervix, and then you have this air stripe showing you the vagina, and this is the Denon-Villiers fascia. And then you have the pubis and the puborectalis and the pelvic lateral wall and muscles. Now, coming down from the rectum to the anorectal junction, the anorectal junction, please remember, is not visible endoscopically. This is the dentate line. This is the anorectal line or the line of Hermann and Desfosses. This is the anal transitional zone under which you have the hemorrhoids. And this is the anorectal ring around a centimeter or above. Endoscopically, it is a virtual landmark. On PR examination, it is palpable posteriorly and laterally as a ledge of puborectalis. And on US, the anorectal junction can be well defined as the upper border of the puborectalis. So this is the puborectalis sling. And this is an inverted image of the pelvis where you see that this is the puborectalis sling. So puborectalis sling, puborectalis sling. And this is how a puborectalis sling looks. This shows you the anatomy of the anal canal. Now, layer 1 is the slightly echogenic inner mucosa and submucosa layer. This is the internal anal sphincter. This star is on the conjoint longitudinal ligament. And 3, the hyperechoic layer is the striated muscle or the external sphincter. Now, when you are doing a EUS imaging of the anal canal with a flexible probe, please remember that the length of the probe itself is 1 centimeter. And I have placed a ruler here which shows you that for the Olympus probe, the distance of the optics to the tip is around 2.5 centimeters, which means that the optics may be out of the anal verge when imaging the middle to lower anal canal. It also has a flexible bending section, so it is very important to avoid tangential imaging. So how do you image? You hold the scope is gripped with one hand against the anus. So your grip now is right against the anal verge to stabilize the instrument within the anal canal so that the patient doesn't push it out and you remain in a stable position. This is what I had described. Anal canal on EUS shows you a 4-layer structure. The mucosa and submucosa cannot be resolved separately. We call it a mucosa-submucosa complex. Unlike what is written in the textbooks, we can normally see, at least I can make out very well the hemorrhoids in the mucosa-submucosa complex. You have the internal anal sphincters. And if there are hemorrhoids, you see the hemorrhoidal vessels penetrating the muscular layer. This mixed echogenic layer is the conjoint ligament, which is an extension of the longitudinal ligament of the rectum. This is the external anal sphincter. Now, when we image the anal canal, we image it at 3 stations. One is the high station, where you have the puborectalis and the deep part of the external anal sphincter. So the ring of EAS is incomplete anteriorly, and this is the area of the perineal body. So you have a complete hypoechoic ring of the internal sphincter, the puborectalis, but the striated muscle may be incomplete anteriorly, more so in females. The middle anal canal is defined by the superficial part of the external sphincter. So you have the complete IAS complete EAS, perineal body anteriorly, and the anococcygeal ligament posteriorly. That is the mid-anal canal. When you talk of the lower anal canal, the internal anal sphincter finishes, and the external anal sphincter, as you see in this image, extends for about a centimeter or so below the end of the internal sphincter. So you only see the whitish striated muscle, and this is the lower third of the anal canal. We measure the sphincter dimensions at the mid-anal canal level at the 3 o'clock and at the 9 o'clock level. Internal anal sphincter is normally 2 to 4 millimeters in diameter, and it gets thicker with age. But at any age, more than 4 millimeter is abnormal and is one of the contributory causes of a pelvic outlet obstruction. External anal sphincter is 5 to 10 millimeter and is often overestimated by US, and like any other skeletal muscle in the body, it becomes thinner with age. So this is just to show you the anal sphincters with a linear probe. This is the puborectalis. Here is the inner circular muscle, which expands to form the internal anal sphincter, outer longitudinal muscle, which extends as the median conjoint ligament. This is the external sphincter. And if I can pause this, see that the internal sphincter ends before the external sphincter. So this is the external sphincter. This is the internal sphincter with a linear probe. This is a medial conjoint ligament which thins out as you reach the lower part of the anal canal. So you can trace it roughly halfway down the internal sphincter, and the external sphincter sort of centimeter below the internal sphincter. Now, what about the perineal body measurement? It is seen below the levator at mid-anal canal level, as I have mentioned. It is not seen as a distinct structure on US, but it separates the anal canal from the membranous urethra in males and lower vagina in females. And how do you measure it? One gloved finger in the vagina and the probe in the rectum. So the measurement is from the reflection of the gloved finger to the inner margin of the internal anal sphincter, and less than 10 millimeter is a attenuated perineal body. That is the definition. Anococcygeal raphe is also seen in the mid-anal canal as a triangular hypoechoic structure posteriorly, and the importance is that this should not be taken as a midline posterior sphincter defect, should not be confused with it. And I think I managed to cover most of the anorectal anatomy with US, although in a rushed fashion. I shall be happy to initiate any discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for excellent demonstration of the various anatomical structure. And sir, one query for you, that is regarding the preparation. Depending on the operator, they sometimes do enema or colonoscopy preparation because the fecal matter can produce artifacts while doing the performing the procedure. And which one you prefer? Is there any particular situation standard colonoscopy preparation is preferred over the enema alone?
In general, if I have to go into the rectum, I would prefer a PEG enema, a PEG preparation, a full split dose PEG preparation, because even a limited amount of stool, you can never predict how much stool a patient will have in the rectum once you go in. So if you are going to do a rectal evaluation or a sigmoid evaluation, then it has to be a split dose PEG preparation like a colonoscopy. If I have to just do a sphincteric evaluation, then anal canal will normally not have any stool. It is very simple. Then I just reduce the stool burden with an enema, ask the patient to evacuate just before the procedure, and then for anal evaluation, that itself is sufficient. Sometimes even unprepared evaluation is okay for the anal canal.
And one more question regarding the sedation, you prefer for all, sir, or any preference sedation?
No, actually, there is not much requirement for sedation, even if you go up high in the rectum. We are privileged that we do all procedures with propofol, but that is a luxury, not something essential. It is just to give some patient some amnesia, some dignity, and maybe just make him or her more comfortable for the procedure, and more of the patient comfort measure rather than any necessity for the examination per se. Since many patients are embarrassed, and well, it is an anorectal examination, never a comfortable discussion or a procedure for the patient. So more for the patient embarrassment or comfort is sedation required, not for the procedure per se.
Regarding the indications, even though it has complementary role in assessing the rectal cancer staging and thing. Generally, most of the center, even though we practice routinely, we rarely get the cases for the assessing the real assessment of the thing. And only what I frequently performed is one is a rectal abscess. I drained it. That is one thing, and a few metastatic deposits in the Douglas pouch, and they ask for the FNAC, and those are the two things therapeutically I performed. But what are the common indications you get, because you work at a high volume center, and what are the common indications you get?
We don't make a distinction between upper and lower. So there are many indications for upper, many indications for lower. The lower part is just being underutilized.
Yes.
So right from anal sphincter evaluation, pelvic outlet obstruction, pelvic pain, puborectalis dyssynergia, and obstructed defecation, sphincter defects, post-surgical sphincter repair from the anal canal.
Yes.
Also perianal fistulas, the abscesses, perianal abscesses, a definition of the abscess. Then all pathologies of all submucosal lesions of the rectum, if indicated, obviously. Rectal cancer staging, particularly low rectal cancer, where US has some superiority over an MRI.
Yes.
And in stenotic lesion, MRI is more superior to possibly a non-passaged US evaluation.
And evaluate completely.
And also the pelvic gynecological pathologies like suspected endometriosis,
yes,
certain other select pathologies, metastatic deposits in the pouch of Douglas,
yes,
lymph nodes in the lower pelvis. You can go up right till the aortic bifurcation. So certain lymph nodes are better evaluated from below. The rectal wall is easy to puncture. And then infectious complications should not deter you from puncturing across.
okay.
And prostatic evaluation, although I have not covered that, the lower ureteric stones at the pelvic-ureteric junctions can be very well seen with US. Bladder pathology. So now you are encroaching on the urological part. My only disappointment is that with US you cannot give an adequate histological confirmation of prostatic cancer, as is the requirement by the urologist. But still, evaluation of many different odd pathologies of the prostate and the prostatic urethra is a very wide field, actually underutilized. And then the lateral, the pelvic compartments and rectal cancer staging, particularly the sub-refinement of T3 categories is, so this, and many more I would have forgotten.
One thing, sir, particularly while draining the rectal abscess and while choosing the cases, the distance away from the rectal wall and the multiloculated thing, and what are the very ideal cases to select for drainage, per rectal drainage of the pelvic abscess?
So per rectal drainage of abscess is very simple. Unlike a pancreatic fluid collection, there is no ductal communication with anything. So you don't need to create big holes, and the stents don't need much dwell time. Once you have evacuated the contents, they will usually not refill. So that is principle number one. So people have placed LAMs and other things, but that is not essential. Perirectal collections are totally different from a pancreatic collections, where there is a disrupted duct feeding into the collection. The most important thing in draining abscesses or collections in the pelvis is to make sure you don't perforate, which means that you may as well open the peritoneum in trying to drain a non-loculated non-collection. So one has to be very, very cautious. These collections look very tempting, but they may be free in the peritoneum, not localized. You open them up wide, and then you have created a perforation and kept it open by inserting a stent. So please don't do that. The choice of the abscess drainage has to be very strict. Infraperitoneal, loculated inside an organ, or very well defined. A percutaneous catheter drained from outside versus a lumen of the bowel being opened from inside are totally different things. They should never be equated. So in a non-localized collection, the radiologist may insert a percutaneous catheter under sterile conditions, drain it outside, that is acceptable. But you open a non-localized peritoneal collection, you have created a perforation. Yes. So the patient selection and the principle should be kept in mind. It's all a matter of common sense.
as a peritoneum is covered in the upper 2/3 of rectum, and the lower third is relatively free. And you mean to say the collections below that level, above intact peritoneum is needed, or any well-defined collection, even if it has extension into the peritoneal cavity, is okay to drain?
So the point remains the same. You can perforate free into the peritoneum, or you can perforate free below the peritoneum. Obviously, the damage done is more if you are above, but then I would not want to open up a non-defined collection or a collection outside any defined organ on either side of the peritoneum. So you will possibly get away if you do it below the peritoneum, because it is still a confined space by virtue of the bony pelvis.
It should
but
be
in general, think what you are doing.
Regarding to ma'am, I have one query to ma'am. Ma'am, while performing ESD and EMR, you sprayed the collagen spray, and from which company you used it, ma'am, and which product?
This is Hemoseal spray by Shaili. It's an invention by Dr. V.G. Mohan Prasad actually. So he uses it mainly to heal ulcers and also for bleeding lesions. Let's say there's a malignancy and it's if you're just giving palliative care and the patient has a lot of bleeding, spraying collagen helps. And if we have I'm talking about other things, like let's say there is an ulcer bleed and then there is so much of bleed that we cannot visualize. Initially, we can spray collagen and wait for it to get controlled. So collagen is a natural component and activates many parts of the coagulation cascade. So it helps really, and also helps in healing. So we usually use it for all lesions to promote healing. You could see in that one patient, actually the video didn't play, but post-resection, the first patient, post-resection, the patient had a 2/3 involvement of the rectal circumference. And in spite of that, after removal, you can see the base, it's so clean. It also helps with pain management. Sometimes, they don't have any pain at all.
One last question to Vikram sir. Sir, regarding the rectal varices, ma'am showed EVL banding that generally we do. And what is your experience with coil embolization with in perirectal varices, portal hypertension with low RGI bleed? Any experience?
Yes. So unlike the upper, where we are reasonably good in practice with the direct endoscopic injection of varices, in the rectum, I would like to do a US guided injection in most rectal varices. Coil deployment is very difficult because you need micronestor coils. The perforators are around 4 millimeter, 3 millimeters, 5 at the maximum. So you need very small coils. And then, if you put a coil, the perforator is gone, but then very often the results are not very good. So the good thing about rectal varices is that unlike a gastric varices, the inflow perforators are easy to define. In practice, you find one perforator, two perforator, max 3 perforators, but usually one dominant perforator which is coming in. You can target the inflow perforator with confidence and see the injected flowing down. I use mostly US guided sclerosant injection and something called foam sclerosant. That is my way of doing it, but then I have to publish it. Because I am afraid of glue. It's a small channel injected, and then I am afraid of the glue spilling out. So you can puncture it with a 19 or a 22G needle and do a sclerotherapy into the perforator, and the inflow will take it down into the downstream rectal varices. But honestly, the idea is to occlude it. So you can inject a thrombin slurry. We have done that. You can inject a micronestor coil. You can inject glue or a combination of these. Everything, but he has done everything. There are only 5 or 6 case reports, case series available in the literature. This is uncharted territory. But we do it with the US guided injection now, most of the cases. And bending, I don't do much bending in the rectal varices, although they are very good. But if bending is to be done, they are to be done at the topmost part of the varix, not at the lowermost, unlike what has been propagated by the paper by Dr. Patrick Kamath, that you bend the downstream part. No, perforators are from above, so you bend the topmost part of the varix.
With the permission of the chair, we have seen the varices, like even the distal varices disappearing once you just go and catch the proximal varix. So beautifully, it's so gratifying and it's so simple. Even duodenal varices, the best thing to do is to do an endoloop or do band ligation. And about Sir's question on collagen, which was my invention, is 2011. So now it's gone for patenting also. So we've used in two situations. One is the bleeds, the other one is for healing. So after endoscopic mucosal resection, or like the one video Madhura was trying to show was 7.5 centimeter lateral spreading adenoma with 2 spots of carcinoma in situ, which is circumferential in the rectum. That's why we took 8 hours to dissect. I just wanted to test my skill whether I can withstand that sort of a procedure. So I did it overnight, and then again the next morning I posted. So once I dissected the whole area, circumferential 7.5 centimeters, and then I sprayed collagen. Absolutely no pain, nothing. The patient, that was my one of my close friend who was a doctor, his own sister. Now on follow-up for 3 years, absolutely no further recurrence. So the collagen, it's just like I had another lady with the esophageal just 2.5 centimeters, which I dissected. This was about 5-6 years ago, and then sprayed collagen on top. And then within 6 hours, the patient could drink a hot bone meat she could take without any pain. So it just forms a barrier, it protects. And also collagen, generally, if there is a mucosal abrasion, the collagen comes into play only on day 3 to 5. Whereas here, we are doing it in hour 0. So we just bring in collagen in hour 0 because it has to wait for the fibroblasts and macrophages to come in, that is day 3 to 5. So here we start at hour 0. So it just starts forming a matrix over which the epithelialization can happen. Platelets can adhere. So it forms a beautiful...
Yeah, like in the rectal polypectomies and all, even in the smaller ones, like more than 10 millimeters, they're doing. And when after doing polypectomy, if you take biopsies from the edges and all, it's been shown like almost 10% have some residual adenoma left behind. So what particular tricks do you suggest to avoid this?
You're talking about adenomas where your sessile
lesions.
Yeah. And even though you're removed from the base, so one is...
There are many studies which show that even after good care and all, the edges still show some 10% of them show residual disease.
So what we do is we keep them under surveillance. What Dr. Vijay was telling, that patient with a large tuberculous adenoma, we had her under 3 months, 6 months surveillance, and we kept checking. And NBI examination, that is what I wanted to show. Actually, the NBI examination, again, we checked and we got the biopsied, and there was still a little portion of tissue there. So we resected that once more. So my suggestion is to have a good surveillance, but would you like to discuss any techniques?
No, actually, I think what Madhura Srinivas was asking about, post-dissection, if you find some residual tumor tissue, what do? Many of the Westerners would do just APC. That is the simplest and the easiest. So otherwise, you can use
APC on all the remaining tissue for the previous.
Also, you can.
My doubt is like, as in Barrett's esophagus, can it lead to some buried this one like syndrome, like, and cause recurrence later? That's if you use APC.
If the dissection is not proper and if you're left residual tissue, yes, by burning APC. If it is deep-seated, then it can just get buried, and on top the squamous epithelium will grow, but underneath the tissue will remain. So I think the tip is proper.
Edges or below?
Yeah,
are you talking about the edges or below? Because the depth. I think you mean the depth, sir.
No, I'm not lateral arterial.
Lateral edges. Okay.
Yeah.
The edges. So that is what. So you need to have proper assessment prior to start dissecting. You just need a good NBI. Just zoom, have a look at the margins, and then mark them properly, at least a centimeter away from the edge, so that you don't miss out the lesion. So it's always better to mark it properly and start dissecting rather than miss out something. I think I should congratulate Vikram for a fantastic lecture on EUS. It was a beautiful anatomy class for us. I was just wondering, now many units have given up using radial scopes. So that is why the linear scopes are very important. In our unit, we use both, but we are very, very bad at anorectal EUS. We don't deploy much at all. So I think probably you should come and train us once to do all these EUS, anorectal EUS.
No, thank you, sir. Coming from you, I am humbled. And thanks again, sir. I learn from you. I cannot teach you. Thank you, sir.
We always learn from all of you now.
Sir. But we use a lot of radial EUS. So we use radial EUS, we use mini probes, we use IDUS, we use linear probes, we use transabdominal probes. So, I don't think we should be condemning radial either in the upper or in the lower tract. It is still in India, we still have limited scopes. We are not that rich or that resource affluent as in the Western countries, because you use linear EUS probe, just keep on gluing, you'll lose your scopes in a matter of, or only directed at interventions, you'll soon end up without your scopes. Electronic radial EUS scope can still be the workhorse of the department, restricting a linear EUS scope to FNA and targeted intervention. So
exactly.
So it is still a very useful modality, both in the upper as well as in the lower. We are very fond of all the EUS modalities.
And especially when there is a small lesion, like a tiny polypoid lesion, I find that mini probe is the best. You just fill in water and keep the mini probe. All the layers are so beautifully defined. You can just very easily make out from which layer it arises. We always deploy a mini probe before we go in for EST.
The more varied modalities of EUS that a person uses, the better his skills and cognitive abilities become. So you restrict yourself to one plane of imaging, and then I don't think the cognitive part is going to extend beyond a certain limit. So you see the sphincters with radial, with linear, three-dimensional reconstruction with the probes, and then your understanding possibly deepens. Ditto with even a bile duct in the upper tract. You see it from the inside with IDUS, from the outside with the EUS, with the linear, with radial. Doing one thing improves you in the other thing also. So I don't think, at least in EUS, which is mainly a cognitive modality, more of learning rather than just the hand movement, because we are not doing anything, we are sitting there and watching. Using multiple modalities of EUS is absolutely essential in my mind.
So do you prefer...
Sir, how often do you use EUS in defecatory disorders to assess? How often do you use in your clinical practice?
I am sitting in a liver hospital. I do get some referrals, but I'm sorry, this modality is very underutilized for me. I wish I could do it more often. I am trying to get the gynae people from other hospitals to send those to me. We do have some run-ins, but yes, very underutilized.
So do you prefer the rigid scope or the flexible scope?
Flexible scope. I use the Olympus rigid also. We got it. I was very fond of it. I got it. But I'm no longer in Fortis. In my previous hospital, I had it. Now I'm only with a flexible probe.
I find it particularly difficult when I'm using in the upper part of the rectum, where you cannot completely fill the rectum with water.
I agree. Right now, if you have the choice of a mechanical rotating rigid probe, it offers you no advantage over a flexible probe. Flexible probe is far superior because it gives you much more this thing. But if you have a electronic rigid linear probe from some manufacturers, it gives you the option of elastography to evaluate the sphincters, 3D reconstruction. All these are by BK Medical paired with Hitachi. Then obviously you get other advantages over the current radial EUS scopes, which do not offer you the same. So the 3D reconstruction, 3D work in the anorectum, the rigid probe is more rigid. You are not dependent on your hand for slow withdrawal. And for elastography, these are the only places where rigid probes by the BK Medical may give you, these are the electronic radial may give you some advantage. But practically, a flexible radial probe is very good.
Actually, as we are overshooting the time, and I must thank Dr. Vikram Bhatia and Dr. Madhura Prasad for their excellent presentations and giving their insight into the subject. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. And I thank you all chairpersons and panelists for their inputs. Thank you.
Thank you.